Hello, and welcome to AI Insights, the Executive Brief. I'm Ben's AI avatar, here to kick off another engaging episode where we explore the intersection of technology, AI, and business strategy.
Technology is an enabler. It should be a foundation and a fundamental part of the way that the organization is growing and thriving, and it needs to be viewed as such. But we've got to bring everybody the journey and not expect that, a CFO in one company is the same likeness of understanding as another. And so how do we do that to really build, a high level of emotional intelligence and engagement across those areas?
Each episode, Ben Bohman himself dives into conversations with industry leaders to uncover the latest trends and insights. Today, we're excited to have Shawnna DelHierro, a seasoned technology leader with 2 decades of experience transforming companies across retail, healthcare, and beyond.
Being able to layer in AI very quickly, taking some very primitive use cases and start to leverage it, that was the catalyst. And whereas, even at that time, it was viewed as a luxury. Right. It immediately went from being a luxury to being a necessity.
From leading CIO roles to modernizing back office systems and integrating AI into customer journeys, Shawnna brings a wealth of knowledge and passion for both technological innovation and the human side of leadership. So, without further ado, let's dive into this insightful discussion and explore the future of AI, technology, and the associate journey with Shawnna DelHierro.
So, Shawnna DelHierro, I've been in technology for about 20 years now. Have led companies and technologies and transformation in retail and healthcare and a combination of both. More recently, CIO of technology and e-commerce and omnichannel and the outdoor retail space. And then in the last several months have been working with a number of different companies on their transformation journey and modernizing their back office systems, and then also layering in their utilization of AI and LLM and how they look ahead at the incorporation of that within their call centers, their customer care, and then their overall customer journey. But I also have a big passion around the associate journey. And so I think that there's a model there that is really successful. So helping to kind of guide and steer them as they develop their 1, 3, and 5-year roadmaps to be able to augment the experience with utilization of more modernized technologies that are at their availability today.
Yeah, Shawn, I love that. I really love your, if you want to call it climbing the corporate ladder, the story of going from one position, let's say director position, to a CIO to a CTO. And you, like you talked about, you've been a CIO or CTO for the last 4 or 5 years or so. But you were also, obviously, you don't start there, you were a director. So there's 2 transitions I'm interested in talking about. One is that transition from being a director to a CIO, and then also going from a C-suite executive to more of a consultative role. But let's start with that director. I think there's a lot of people that are interested in that because people have aspirations, right? I want to eventually be X, and X can be that C-suite position. What was that transition like, and how did that happen?
Yeah, I think throughout my career, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've worked for some really powerful leaders that invested in me, both in seeing what my aspirations were, but then also seeing the availability of my talent in different areas of the organization and affording me the latitude to go and explore those and to contribute in those different areas. So call it the shoulder tap, call it being voluntold in different projects or different areas. But I always had that willingness to go and to dive in, and very, very early days of my career, being afforded the opportunity not to be pigeonholed. And so coming just, early days out of school, being able to learn and explore different areas of business, whether that was in supply chain or manufacturing. I learned a lot very early on, and I've been able to really kind of grab hold of that throughout the course of my career and kind of carry that through my journey. And so as I've done that and kind of had those as building blocks, and then as the latter part of my career in the last decade or so, having some really very colorful, very talented leaders that saw that spark in me, that had that aggressive pursuit of growth and contribution for the organization. Mine was never about title per se. Mm-hmm. It was about the way that I could drive benefit, drive enhancement, drive overall goal achievement throughout the enterprise. And for me, I see technology as an enabler of that. And I think back in my days at Toyota is really where I saw that technology was what unleashed the potential of the organization and unleashed the potential of the different contributors. And that was really where I kind of took heed to say, this is where I really want to go and explore technology as a career. And then, moving into director, senior director, VP level, and having, great mentors that saw that I could be within their succession plan. And so moving into that, going from being someone who had great depth of experience in MRP and ERP, going into an area to be able to learn infrastructure and learn, the metal of a data center, and to really be more hands-on in the network and the telco space, and then moving more into app dev and being able to understand SaaS and platform utilization. And then the more holistic leading those teams collectively through strategy. And then, really being able to have that career advancement track of having that mentorship to say, this is about much more than just understanding the intricacies of technology. This is about how you lead an organization. How do you partner? How do you have those good relationships across your peer channels so that they see you as an investment, but as someone who has that seat at the table, that you're a key contributor to the overall success. And so I was very fortunate, that I did have a fairly rapid, progression going from that senior director to VP. It was about a 4 to 5 year maturation of process. But then once I was in that seat of CIO, CTO, continued to be able to take on other areas of business and responsibility and to be able to grow those, and then have carried that forward.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that really resonate with me is you talk about the hands-on experience that you get. And I also love that you have such a breadth of experience. I'd be able to go from app dev to, networking to WAN to security and now into AI. It's interesting, but do you miss the hands-on stuff? Because I know, like for me, I was hands-on for 10, 13 years, and you start getting the executive layer, and you don't get to actually get your hands dirty. And I'm not saying you forget it, because you still get the strategy. And as an executive, you're more of a technology strategist than digging in. You don't have time to dig in like that. But do you miss sometimes the hands-on stuff?
Yeah, I do. So one of my greatest passions is around building high performing teams, and I think that's probably where, especially in these last 6 or 8 months of being in this more consultative role and this advisory role, as much as I love being able to help companies develop their path forward, I do miss, that development of people and seeing people be able to grow beyond their current role or their current purview. But in addition to that, I don't ever shy away from the late night phone calls, albeit we want the 5 nines of uptime, but sometimes the firefighting is what kind of gets our blood pumping. And so there's something to be said for, that level of investment that we do get a little far removed from as we start to kind of, grow and move the ladder. But I think I've been fortunate that I've still been within organizations that were very lean. And I've, again, really focused on not the numbers game of, growing my organization by, I took 50 people to 150 people, but really focusing on, the key talent of each of those seats. How can we maximize the efficiency, but also maximize on the talent that sits within each of those roles so that they're not just a one trick pony, if you will. I've got people who are very diverse in skill, who can really spread out. They cover multiple bases when someone else is out or there's a need or there's a challenge. And that really came in really clutch whenever COVID came around. And, and so I think that there's something to be said for when you build those cohesive teams that have high levels of trust, integration, and that ability to work together and to hunker down. It helps you not to get so far removed from it. And so you still have that, that engagement because you've worked so effectively to have that level of one-to-one relationship. And so that's the way that I prefer to work. And that's the way that I've seen greatest level of success.
Yeah, and what you're talking about really is that just the keys to being a great leader. And I know in my experience in technology and corporate experience, there's different types of managers, right? And there's different types of leaders. And another thing that I feel like is very unique, and not, I wouldn't say necessarily unique, but fortunate, you talk about how people were able to see your talent and see what you're able to bring to the table, and then also put you in positions to be able to grow. And it is interesting that sometimes I've seen some leaders be threatened by talent. They might be threatened maybe that their job might be taken or different things. You never know what's inside someone's head, but that you weren't in positions where people felt threatened, but they felt that they wanted to see you succeed and see you grow.
Mhm.
And now you've taken that, and that might be your personality and who you are, uh, by osmosis going over to them, because now you're taking that and that's your mindset, is how do you help people grow? How do you build a team? How do you see people improve? So how do you see that fitting into like good leadership and that
Mhm.
team building and expanding and helping people promote within their talents and even their personal like talents and personalities?
Yeah, I'll be the first to say that I didn't come into that without my own bumps and bruises and failures along the way, and
Sure.
some hard knocks of I've got to change my approach with certain people and read the room better. So,
Yeah.
earlier days in my career, understanding, the dynamics within, a given conference room, understanding the dynamics of different people, but really doubling down on emotional intelligence, I think is critical at whatever level of the organization you are. But I
Yeah.
think, technologists are a unique group of people. And, if we were to look back, and this, Ben, from having been in technology for an extended period of time, we're a unique breed.
Yeah.
And 5, 10 years ago, we very much were the order takers, and we
Right.
waited for the business to very much tell us what they needed. And then we kind of worked feverishly to turn something back to them in hopes that it
Yeah.
met the need. Now our role has completely changed in that 5, 10 year time. It's a paradigm shift from where we once were. Now we go and we partner with them to
Mhm.
understand either their challenge as it is today or what they see as the future state and the need. We're also much more proactive than reactive as we once were. And
Yeah.
so our need to break free from that dark basement behind a screen, that's illuminated, and, we just, bang out a keyboard to say this is what we do, is not the same. And
Yeah.
so really leveraging that, being someone who is very transparent. You can't ever assume that someone is going to trust you. You have to, assume that you're going to have to build that, and really, putting it out there to say, I'm never the smartest person in the room. I will be the first one to always make that claim. I've yet to find a room that I'm the smartest person within, because I learn something every time. And
Yeah.
so I think just having humility and strong EQ to understand that what makes one person tick is not what makes the other, and really just recognizing that a really strong C-suite of executives are all going to be incredibly unique.
Yeah.
If everyone is the same, then your success is going to be metered, and you should expect that it's going to be somewhat throttled. And so, really recognizing that when you're talking with your CHRO or you're talking with your CMO, as a technology leader, as an advancement leader, that you've got to really hone in and listen to what the needs of the business are, what the needs of their vertical are,
Yeah.
and then understand what the needs of their people are, and then encouraging your organization to get out and do the same. Go sit the seat, go live the life of your payroll clerk, go live the life of your distribution employee, go be in your retail space or your clinical space, and really walk a mile in their shoes to understand how we can be most effective.
Absolutely. And especially like you said, when you're working across personas with across so many different departments now, because IT isn't disparate, like you said, it's you have to work with marketing, you have to work with production, you have to work across the ecosystem of the business. I still think so. I became a IT leader when I was 21 years old. And I was in a room of 40, 45-year-old, 50-year-old executives on the senior staff. It wasn't a big, it was like a $20 million a year printing company, but I still can think of things that I said back then, and they still like, why did I? That was the dumbest thing in the world to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, at that same time, I had great leadership where the owner of the company, I remember he pulled me aside when he first hired me to run the computer department. He's like, look, I don't really care how easy your job is. I care about how easy you make everyone else's else's job. So he
Great
didn't mean
advice.
that rude, but he saw how computers and how technology was supposed to be used. And then the CFO gave me a book and gave me a chapter, and he's like, read this chapter. It's called Computers. The chapter was actually called Computers, and it was about
Mhm.
how they were basically a money drain on the company. And he challenged me to turn the computer department into a profit center, not a cost center. And that was back in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
where we've adapted now, and now that's how it's looked at. So I was very fortunate to have some leaders that it was some tough love, but I needed it at 21 years old. I was very immature and, now I'm like you, where I know I'm not the smartest person in the room. When I was
Mhm.
21, I thought I was the smartest person in the room, but
Mhm.
wasn't. So it's great. I love those insights. That's amazing. Now let's get into AI a little bit. When
Sure.
did you first in your career? I mean, AI has been around for a while, and you've had a long and lustrous uh, technology career. When did AI first hit your radar? AI, not machine learning and everything else, but we're
Mhm.
like, oh, AI might be something.
Yeah, I think it was when we were first utilizing RPA, where I saw that RPA was great, and that we had a number of use cases where RPA was really driving improvement, that it was really helping us to get away from some monotonous processes, that it had tons of potential, but there was still something that was lacking. And so as we were developing, and this was as I was very new in my C-suite role,
Mhm.
I may have even still been interim at this point. I don't recall, but developing our roadmap, I had AI on our 3+ year roadmap. And a few months into that, here we are, and COVID came about. And
Okay.
so, March of that year, we closed 730 clinics and retail spaces overnight. We sent home all 400 plus of our corporate employees. We had to pivot on a dime, like everyone else did,
Mhm.
with a whole bunch of unknowns. We had patients and customers who needed their contacts and their eyeglasses and needed to see an eye doctor. We had tons of things we had to solve for.
Yeah.
We knew that we had patients going to emergency rooms for eye related needs. We needed those doctors to be able to come back and see patients, et cetera. And so for us, as my CEO at the time, who is still a very great friend and mentor, that I talk with frequently as he's in a new role at a new
Mhm.
organization, um, we had a passion and a mission around what are we going to do to be very gritty to make
Mhm.
something happen. And AI was the solve for that for us. And
Sure.
thankfully, we were a bit more advanced in the things that we were doing around communication modalities with our patients and customers. But being able to layer in AI very quickly, taking some very primitive use cases and start to leverage it, that was the catalyst. And I would tell you that, and I say this very genuinely, that had it not been for COVID, I still think that AI probably would have been in that 2 to 3 year time frame,
Yeah.
because for us, we were operating well. It wasn't a necessity of business. And
Sure.
whereas, even at that time, it was viewed as a luxury.
Right.
It immediately went from being a luxury to being a necessity.
Yeah.
And so that's whenever, I had it as a vision for how we could improve our customer experience, how we can
Mhm.
improve our patient experience. But we had other big earmarked investments and big projects that were going to be very intensive. This just got the pull ahead.
Yeah.
So that's whenever, we were able to take some of those things that were in the plan, in the roadmap, pull them in and be able to really start leveraging them. And then, as it were, the floodgates just opened for us to be able to continue to build the use cases, the utilization throughout the enterprise. Really the inverse of what you would traditionally do, which is launch your AI internally, see some improvement, see that, low hanging fruit of ROI, then turn it to customer facing. We did the actual opposite. We had it patient and customer facing first, and then started to really turn it on and make it active throughout the enterprise internally, and then
Yeah.
throughout some of the other business entities.
That's awesome. And they're great use cases, even back in 2020. I think the interesting thing is because AI hit the marketing buzzword back in November. And now, of course, everyone's an AI company. People forget that machine learning, big data, these kind of things have been around for
Right.
a decade or so. So it's great that you had the foresight. to implement that so quickly. Now, you mentioned something else that's interesting, and that's the from a luxury to a necessity. And I
Mm-hmm.
think right now businesses are making that decision. They're getting, the board is pushing down initiatives saying, hey, we need an AI initiative. What is it? Like in the cloud? We need a cloud initiative. What is it? They don't even know what the cloud is. They just want to be on board with the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe there is AI right now that is relevant and necessary. And there still is AI that's a luxury and maybe even a risk to implement in the environment. So
Mm-hmm.
as you're talking to businesses, how are you balancing AI as far as, hey, this could be a necessity. It's probably from a business use case, but this is a necessity. This is a luxury, and this is still risky. Let's hold off on this portion of AI because there still needs to be more development. Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
It absolutely does, and you're spot on. And I think, a couple of thoughts on that. We, if you just talk about, Chat GPT, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as technologists, as economists, whatever you want to, any role, any hat that you want to call out, we unleash that beast without any balanced accountability or onus on the other side of what we were putting out
Right.
into the universe. No one said, hey, if you type this in and you get a returned value that is incorrect, you're responsible to either say that's incorrect
Yep.
or to redirect to a website that has the correct information,
Yep.
or to input the correct information, because it only takes so many times that that algorithm is ultimately going to say this is a valid response.
Right.
So right now we're creating this metaverse of junk data. And so
Mm-hmm.
cleanup of that, it's anytime you try to wrap your arms around something once it's out there is always difficult. And so I usually will use that as an example of why unleashing that AI beast can also be incredibly problematic.
Yep.
If you think just the term reverse engineering, it's always going to be more costly, it's always going to be more painful. Lead in with security in mind.
Sure.
Understand what your data is.
Yep.
And I usually will use some kind of shock and awe, but if you don't understand the data that you have today, if you don't know structured versus unstructured, if you don't know what your crown jewels are, and forbid that you end up, on the other side of a ransom attack and they have 100% containment of your data,
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do? Well, you're going to pay for 100% of that data to get it back, because it may only be that 2 to 5% of it are critical to your business. But if you don't know, you don't know.
Yep.
And you're going to buy back Sally's 15 years of her grandkids' pictures that were on her shared drive. And you're going to buy back Fred's 20 years of email. And you're going to buy back, I mean, truth be told, you're going to buy back a bunch of junk data, and you're going to buy back redundant data, not system of record data, because you don't know. So you've got to really start with understanding what you have and then how you want to preserve and contain that when you leverage AI.
Yeah.
Using AI doesn't mean you have to open the floodgates for everyone else to use your data. You can go
Right.
out and you can grab pieces and parts of it, but you want to be very careful about how you preserve and how you protect that. So, first and foremost, I always say, it's about the cybersecurity piece has to be front of mind, and
Yep.
that should be something that every board and stakeholder and shareholder understand. Everybody talks over the hedges about, at one point in time it was about cloud, get everything to the cloud. Why? I don't know, my
Right.
neighbor's doing it. And then it was AI, and now it's Chat GPT, et cetera. So just understanding the risks, rewards, and liabilities that come with advancements of technology, we have
Mm-hmm.
to be very, very aggressive about communicating that, and then continually re-educating. It's a great tool, it helps us tremendously, but understanding that, being able to mask identities and personas is something that is real and pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
That we have corporate espionage, we have international espionage. Those are real cases that are taking place in even the smallest of companies today, and in the education sector, and specifically fintech as well. So we have to be very aggressive as to our awareness campaigns,
Yep.
all the way at our frontline employees. And so everyone wants it. It sounds really good, and they budget and they allocate for it, and they have no idea what it is.
Right.
So I just, I really kind of challenge, other leaders, in the CFO, CTO, CIO space to say, what does that mean? And then how does it align with our corporate identity
Mm-hmm.
as to who we are?
Yeah. That's great. And that I want to jump back into the security in a sec, but
Mhm.
you mentioned something that I still want to get a little bit deeper into. And especially
Sure.
when you talk about supply chain, you talk about retail, talk about even healthcare, hospitality, so many things, but that's the value of the data. And you mentioned something I believe that's crucial when we're talking about an AI implementation. And one of the questions I like to ask is, are you even ready for AI? That, and that data conversation, data is the lifeblood of AI. And I had one
Mhm.
guest on, she said it's the oxygen. I love that. It's the
Yeah,
oxygen of AI, it's AI's oxygen. And I think that's so right now companies are rushing to get an AI initiative before cleaning up their data lakes, before getting their data integrity in check, before putting security measures. I mean, of course, deep fake is a problem, but there's also an issue with bad actors are going to start trying to manipulate your AI responses within your business to
correct.
give your people bad answers and bad responses. So there has to be some precautions within AI. But let's talk about, sorry, I jumped back in security, but let's talk about the data
Mhm.
and that the need to clean data. Are you seeing a lot of businesses, and I know I'm probably over 50% of the businesses I talk to still feel like and will admit that their data is not where it needs to be. It needs to be organized. It needs to be cleaned. Are you seeing that as well? And how are you specifically addressing that data issue?
Yeah, I think it is a very, very much a real challenge. And even the largest of companies, I talked to a Fortune 50 company just a few weeks back
Mhm.
that they had a previous executive team that was very much proud of the fact that they had every bit of customer data that they'd ever had. So
Mhm.
anything that from their very first customer on. And while in theory that sounds really good, there's a lot of risk that comes with that, whether you're talking about legal discovery or you're
Yep.
talking about just it being your crown jewels of your data, and the risk and the liability that comes with it. But what they didn't know was how much of that data, how much of that client record or customer record was available to who within their organization.
Yep.
So I think one of the key tenets of that is identity management,
Yep.
having role-based security. And so that's one of the questions that I usually will lead in with. Like, let's talk about how you're managing access to your data. If you don't
Mhm.
know what data is today and you don't know where it lives or your system of record for it, how are you managing who's able to get to that data?
Yep.
Let's talk through that, because at least there's a layer there that you can put in to say, well, we have multi-factor authentication, we have role-based security, we have
Yep.
these things in place that at least get us to this point. Then we can kind of click into how do we know our structured versus our unstructured data? How are we preserving our data at rest? What are we doing for DR, et cetera? But there are so many companies today who are sitting on this extensive amount of information that they've not addressed
Yep.
because the focus was get it to the cloud, make it accessible, and then we had this very fast click into we want dashboards, we want real-time data.
Yep.
And so regardless of the modality platform that was used, whether you're talking about BI or Tableau or any of the scenarios there, it was we want to have it on our mobile. We want to be able to 5 o'clock in the morning, we want to open it up, we want to see those key metrics, we want to know, we want to have a hand on the pulse of our business.
Yep.
And so there was so much around the aggressive pursuit of that that we had a lot of technologists who were just wanting to expose the data. And so there's a problem there that we ran at something really quickly to to appease the needs of the business, and now we're trying to kind of backpedal
Yeah.
into, oh, that's a big database or that's a big data lake that really poses a lot of risk. And so trying to kind of squeeze that back down goes back to the same thing I mentioned earlier. Anytime you start to kind of throttle back, people are like, well, wait a minute, I could get to that report yesterday. Well, but why? Did you really
Yep.
need all 50 fields? And so it's much more, it's a much easier conversation to have, if you go into it with the right mindset, with the right frame of conversation that says, we want to be zero trust. We want to be at the point where we only afford people things that are specific to their role, and it's to do the right thing by our customer and the integrity and scale of our business. And we're protecting your liability.
Mhm.
Hey, CEO, I don't want you to have this on your phone. I don't want you to get caught where somebody takes your device and you've been downloading files that suddenly are in your cloud. I mean, we want to prohibit that. And so I know it's easy for you to read when you do that, but that's not what you want. And so education is key and critical. I
Yep.
think that that's where we have a big responsibility as technologists. But I think it goes back to every company. I find very few, very, very few that start the conversation with, we are really solid on where we are with our data or our data integrity. So I think it's a big challenge. I think that's why we're seeing more and more companies who are AI data
Right.
analysis or AI integrity for data purposing or data mining. I think they're necessary. I think there's a cautionary tale around how you use AI to then earmark your data or how you're looking from a metadata perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Before it's cleaned up. And another thing with the data conversation, I know executives are always looking at either saving money or offsetting money, right, to move
Mhm.
into a different area of the business. But right now, if you look at GCP, Azure, and
Mhm.
AWS, there's a huge land grab for the data and the hosting, right, the cloud hosting of the
Mhm.
data. And so there are some massive credits being offered by those three vendors. Now, there's some businesses that have a strategy. I'm going to use AWS here and I'm going to use Azure here and maybe GCP, getting
Mhm.
hotter like over here. But there's a lot of companies that actually could consolidate into one provider. And those credits are actually offsetting a lot of budgets for either AI initiatives or different initiatives. I just want to point that out because it's something to look at as we're trying to save money.
It is. And I think that, anytime that I've had someone ask me, well, tell me your position on, cloud versus on-prem.
Yeah.
I'm if I ever get to a point where I tell you there's 100% of one, I don't know where I'll be,
Right.
because I just don't find that that's a reasonable or responsible approach.
Yeah.
I think there'll always be a hybrid model based on business need, based on system accessibility, latency, what have you. But in the same vein, I think that depending on the environment and the hosting, I think that there are different strengths and weaknesses. While there's a lot of commonality, and you could say, well, if you were to, strip off the name, from a function to function
Right.
standpoint, it's like for like. So I'm doing it based on dollars. Yes and no. I mean, there are still some nuances, especially if you look at, what Azure has done. If you look at
Mhm.
what AWS has done, you look at maybe how aggressive one has been around integration and kind of really trying to build you into certain suites of services and kind of nesting you, if you will. It
Right.
reminds me of some other technologies, maybe 15, 20 years ago, that it was very difficult to get out of.
Right.
But in those things, I mean, there's some goodness that comes of that, and having that, that single point to say, well, this entire suite, which we operate against X platform, I have all of that hosting here. And therefore I know that my data is accessible here. It's secured. It's backed up. My redundancy is here, et cetera. I also use their security posture. So I know that that's my line in tier one defense. And then as we see some of the peripheral security tools being more sophisticated, being able to operate within that Microsoft kernel, for instance, or, being able to be very immersed within, the Google workspace or what have you,
Yeah.
those things also become critical conversations as to where you want your data to live. And so depending on who you are as an organization, depending on what that data is, I think those conversations are becoming a little bit more granular than what people initially perceived them as, where it was just a dollar for dollar
Sure.
conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot to discuss. And like you said, the hybrid environment of using multiple as well, right? Some may be a fit for some data where others aren't, but then there are cases where it might make sense from a consolidation effort. I just thought of this comparison I hadn't thought of. It's not completely off track. It's somewhat, but remember when the cloud was first, we were talking about the cloud, right? So of course you remember, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned it as well. And
Yeah.
we just talked about AI readiness, but the cloud limitation was bandwidth, right? So there, a lot of
Yeah.
companies were still using T1s. I know at my business, we were still using T1s. I actually
Mm-hmm.
bonded T1s and I was a hero. They didn't know how I'd get, it was like 3 mega bandwidth, right? And everyone was like, oh my gosh, everything's so
Yeah.
fast. They were so excited. But it wouldn't be relevant to go on the cloud or convert to a pure VoIP, cloud VoIP system, because the bandwidth wasn't ready for it. And some
Right.
companies actually rushed into it and got sold into these cloud solutions, but the bandwidth was so poor that it wasn't supporting it. And even in that best effort at first, now cable's getting a little bit better. Of course, major organizations need some, obviously, fiber and some stuff with
Sure.
SLAs. But it's kind of, I just thought of that we still had that cloud readiness conversation that had happened. And now we're kind of having the same thing, but it's more around data, not around bandwidth.
It absolutely is. And I have a very great friend that was on my team, who's incredibly sophisticated in the network space, but even more broad than that. But he brought up the same parallel,
Uh-huh.
and it was, and you're spot on that it's so funny that we continue just to shift really from one to the next. And he brought it up even in talking about mobile. When we look at where we were,
Yeah.
even just a few years ago, and then 3G, and then 4G and 5G, and the way that that's just been so accelerated, and how we're leveraging that for business operation. And who would have thought that? I mean, we were so excited about fiber and connectivity
Right.
there, to now we're using cellular, wireless, and satellite for true operation continuity of business. And just to see that transformation has happened so swiftly as well. So it's interesting, the parallels that run, and the way that we go through these challenges in these different decades.
Mhm.
And it'll be interesting to see what our next one looks like.
Yeah.
I think Chat GPT will be all over that one.
It will be. And the other thing too that's going to be interesting is there's always like a 5 to 10 year maturation of technologies. When they first got, like, cloud took 5 to 10 years, even mobile. If you look at when when BlackBerry's really hit business, and it was Crackberry and everyone was all excited about them, there
Loved
was
it.
still about a 15-year maturation of it. But
Yeah.
what I think is going to be interesting is in AI, how quickly it's evolving, and how quickly, because of itself in learning and its amplification. I don't think it, I mean, there will be an overall maturation of it, but I think we're going to see some huge advancements, which is also why I caution, maybe let's not rush too much into it. If you have an ROI, yes, let's move forward with it. But there's some things, look, the technology in 6 months, in a year, is going to completely be, and it might not even be the company that you're talking to at that time. So there is a little bit of hesitation with that, right? Because of how rapidly we're going to see this evolve.
I agree. And I think one thing is, it's good to look at the potentials and the art of the possible today, but I think it's incredibly responsible, and it's incumbent upon us as leaders to think around the contingencies and the what if scenarios. And it's not about doom and gloom. It's not about being the conspiracy theorist by any stretch, but we've lived through some pretty significant things in the last 10 years. And I think that we have to stop and think about around connectivity. If we were to have some significant challenges of connectivity, if we implement so many things that are truly AI, or
Mhm.
that are automated and are non-human driven, how can we re-augment with the human? How can we plug them back into it? What will that look like to be able to reverse it? And are we planning for that? We plan for failover of all of these other things and systems and DR and et cetera, from a continuity standpoint. But are we really taking the time and the effort as we're implementing all of these augmented technologies and these advancements to think through what the reverse would be if it came into necessity? We used to do it, right? I
Yeah,
mean, we talked
absolutely.
about, well, if the network goes down, how will we print payroll
Yeah.
checks? Well, we keep paper checks in, an offsite location with a printer that we could
Yeah.
dot matrix in it. Those were BCP efforts that we would run through once a year. But I don't know that we're taking those same steps, because we've become incredibly reliant upon the ability to restore quickly. It's,
Yeah.
we have a big fiber cut. Well, it's going to be 2 days. 2 days, is that acceptable? Sure. But I think there are some things that we really have to start thinking through, because it's not just one company anymore. We're talking about this at a national and a global level, where everyone is suddenly dependent upon that level of automation and technology. And so we can't assume that our neighbor, our brother, our
Yeah.
sister company, or our service provider is going to be able to restore and recover and help us to be better together. It's, well, hang on, we really probably need to think through this. So that's where I also think that there's some level of engagement that is missing right now, as we're moving so swiftly. What are we thinking about it's good to check the box and go, hey, this is great. Like we've got, a faster motor on board. We've got, but are we still putting the same level of, or it's the same number of life vests aboard?
Yeah. That's such an amazing thought. I've never even, I mean, yeah, we had RAID arrays, right, or duplication within our hard drives. Server arrays, same
Yeah.
concept. We've had HA configurations and wide area networking and technology, HA configurations and switching and firewalls. We've always had duplicate efforts and backups of technology. And AI, that's not really a conversation. And humanity is the failover for AI. If AI
Right.
ever goes off the rails and a business was relying 100% on it and they didn't have the human aspect of it to recover or to do AI things, then yeah, they're going to be in trouble. That's such a great thought. Thank you, yeah, for bringing that up because I think that's amazing. Yeah. Now, sorry, that was a mind blowing thought right there. I've never thought about that. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So now, okay, so we have to wrap up, but
Sure.
last thoughts. Over to you. You're a brilliant business strategist. You're a brilliant technologist. You've shifted over to consulting. Any last thoughts you have on AI, and plus how people can get a hold of you would be great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time and the conversation. I am pretty passionate about this, as you can see. I do think that this affords us great opportunities, whether we're talking about in, early education or we're talking about, through business growth and how we can become competitive as a nation. I think that these are all good things. So I don't want to, be remiss in saying that.
Sure.
But I think that there are a number of things that we have to be incredibly responsible about, as we approach leveraging these technologies. And so we want to be first in market. We want to be competitive, but we need to do so responsibly. And so thinking through, data strategy still has to be front of mind. What are we doing to secure, to secure the data, but to also make sure that we're looking ahead at our business and how we're going to strengthen and scale that.
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned, what is the failover and the contingency for each of these areas that we're automating and driving forward? And then, again, how do we really just develop a roadmap that makes good sense? Does it align with our corporate identity? Are we getting a little too big, a little too far out for what our customers need us to show up as? If we're in the healthcare space, if we're in the technology space, if we're in the education, retail, et cetera, we have to be mindful of being who they expect us to be. You can look at all kinds of studies around just companies who have morphed the colors of their logo. Well, if you morph the colors of your identity and the way that you're engaging, it's equally detrimental or has the potential to be. And so just making certain that as you're getting aggressive and you're moving fast, that you're doing something that is well tested and vetted, to be certain that it's the right things, right? So, and then as far as reaching out to me, I'm available on LinkedIn. I'm very responsive. I try to be as best I can. I work with a couple of different organizations on different speaking engagements and what have you, and I stay pretty busy, but I'm always happy to help and to talk with others, whether it's other technologists that are just struggling on developing their roadmaps for their organizations. But I also do a lot of speaking to different organizations about how they really kind of collectively come together as a C-suite to be able to understand how to share this information throughout the enterprise. How do they build bonds of trust to make certain that they're walking the walk together in that journey? Because it's not about technology being over here as a disparate platform to operate. Technology is an enabler. It should be a foundation and a fundamental part of the way that the organization is growing and thriving, and it needs to be viewed as such. But we've got to bring everybody the journey and not expect that a CFO in one company is the same likeness of understanding as another. And so how do we do that to really build a high level of emotional intelligence and engagement across those areas? And then I kind of wrap always with, you've got to take care of yourself. If you want to be a good leader to your
Yeah.
people and to your organization, your mental and emotional health is absolutely key. And so we all always want to throw our hand up and say, I'm okay I mean, a little humility, but I mean, I'm okay if I need to take a sick day, take a well day, take a day that is you feel really good, and you just need to go and just feel good for the day. You'll come back refreshed, recharged, and better for your organization and for your people. And we need to be better together about recognizing and celebrating that,
Yeah.
because ultimately, it really is about growth, and how we really partner and band together, and we need to recognize that. So, big proponent of mental and emotional health and how we leverage that and talk about it a bit more. So,
Shawnna, I love that. And honestly, I could have talked to you for 2 or 3 more hours. But eventually,
thanks.
our time is valuable. Your time is valuable. I think I'm gonna have you back on to have a specific conversation around health, self care, how businesses can promote it with their employees, because that's a huge passion of mine as well. And I think we talked about that when we first talked and met, and we didn't get a chance to get into that. But I think there's so much relevance, and even from an AI standpoint and the humanity, the fear with people and so much. But I think we're gonna have to jump on and have a just around that. Forget
Sure.
about the technology. Let's just talk about self-care and how businesses can promote it. But thank you so much for jumping on.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. And I look forward to collaborating with you.
Yeah. It was great to talk with you. I appreciate it, Ben.